Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Stephen Bartholomew, Policy Director from Food Industry Asia. And I think in the interest of time, we can get started with this webinar, the Edelman Trust Barometer 2020. And this particular session is very much focused on the food and beverage industry. Before I introduce your presenters for today, and tell you a little bit more about what we hope to achieve from this session. Just a few housekeeping rules so that you're all aware. Everyone other than the panelist and myself are currently on mute and will remain on mute during the entire duration of this webinar. If you have any questions, if you look at your control panel on the right, there's a questions tab. Please type in any questions that you might have during the course of the webinar. And we have about 15 minutes at the end of the session to go through the questions that have been raised. So you won't get the opportunity to actually physically ask the question over the webinar, but you may type in your questions, and we'd be happy at that point to answer any questions you might have. So with that in mind, let's get started on this webinar. As I mentioned, this is the Edelman Trust Barometer 2020, very much focused on the F&B industry here in the region. And this is not the first time we've actually worked with Edelman on the Trust Barometer. Some of you who are FIA members might remember that we've had actual lunch and learn sessions where Edelman has come in and shared their findings with our members from 2015 all the way up to 2018. And unfortunately, obviously, given the present circumstances, we can't do this face-to-face. So hence, we have a webinar. Our two presenters today are Melinda Po, who's the Chief Growth Officer for China for Edelman. And our second presenter is someone quite a lot of you who are FIA members will know very well, Rebecca Bausted. Rebecca is now the Executive Vice President for Food and Beverage for the APAC region for Edelman. And if you've been to any of our joint committee meetings or PAC calls in the last 6 to 7 years, Rebecca was very much a feature of those calls. So welcome back, Rebecca. It's great to have you back on the call. And I'm now going to hand it over to the team at Edelman to take us through this presentation. So over to you.
Thanks so much, Stephen, and it's lovely to be back with the FIA audience. I'm going to turn across to Melinda in a second. What we wanted to run you through today is two studies that we've got that look specifically at trust. The first is the spring edition of Trust, which looks at trust in the era of COVID-19, and it was a research study that we did in this year. The second study that we want to take you through is a deep dive into the food and beverage sector called Eat, Drink, Trust. Now, that was done in March, just as some countries were in the midst of COVID, but there's some really fascinating learnings there that we'd like to take you through. Then we go to Q&A and discussion, and then we can close it out. So Stephen has already introduced both of us, so my colleague Melinda is going to start us off. She operates in our China business, and we're really excited also for Melinda to share some of her learnings of what has happened coming out of COVID-19, as China has been one of the first markets to come out. And then I'll take you through the Eat, Drink, Trust details. So without further ado, I'll hand across to Melinda, who can explain a little bit about Edelman for those that don't know Edelman, just because I'm 12 weeks in, and Melinda will do a fantastic summary for us all. So over to you, Melinda.
Thank you, Rebecca. I hope everyone hear me clearly. And hi from China, which is, I guess everyone's quarantined at home, and we are back to the office. So I'm happy, it's my pleasure to join the sharing today and giving very short background about the Edelman in Asia Pacific. So as you can see that on the slide that we in Asia we're already been 35 years old, and across the entire APAC region, you can see that we actually constitute, we have 21 offices and 10 markets, and also over 1,200 consultants, which is we will provide, including in terms of the reputation and brand service as well. So Rebecca, next page, please. Hello, Rebecca, are you? Yeah.
Can you see the next page?
Yeah. So as you could see that in the last page, there was the service, the clients that we were including to provide, and which is list down our service and expertise. That is why today that we hope to provide a comprehensive point of view from in terms of advisory, reputation, and brand. Of course, by giving our expertise, we are also driven by the digital entertainment and also creative and data intelligence to support our clients and also industry leaders. Okay. So now we are going to be officially getting to the trust parameter, the sharing. So which is you could see that actually during the month of April, Edelman conducted its quarterly update of the trust parameter, focusing on the impact of COVID-19. And the online survey included 11 markets and over 13,000 respondents. The general population was comprised of 1,200 respondents per market, split into two categories. The informed public, roughly 20% of the total global population, and the mass population as well. So in order to be classified as the informed public, respondents needed to meet 4 criteria: aged 25 to 64, university educated, in type quantity of the household income per age group, reports significant media consumption and also engagement. So you could see from this trust parameter report that we are sharing, the next is actually has concluded in terms of education and also varies the age of our consumers. Next page, please. So while analyzing the results of the trust parameter, we have discovered that trust in the food and beverage sector increased by 9 points globally, with 5 markets experiencing double-digit growth, including China, Mexico, Canada, Germany, and France. Japan recorded the only decline over the period between January and May, with South Korea and India recording slight increase only. So you could actually see that from the APAC level and the trust incrementals that we could actually have some the space that we could improve. Next slide, please. So in terms of the respondents, however, you could see that from the slide, you could see the field that business as the whole had a significant room for improvement in terms of providing the products and services people most need, protecting essential employees' health and also safety, and preparing for the eventual recovery. Our survey indicated that businesses are not seen to be meeting those challenges. From the percentage that you can see, for instance, if we look at the square one, the products and services that people need are most readily available, especially during the pandemic. Okay, so next page, please. And another area of the concern for business is in relation to treatment of the employees and the business partners. From the numbers you can see, the first square, 38%. You actually can see that the majority of the respondents believe businesses are putting profit above people, which is not really the positive sign during the pandemic, but that people actually are looking for the people's welfare and employees' financial well-being, as well as supporting smaller enterprise, both upstream and downstream of the value chain, which is that is from our trust parameter. This is the respondents' hope that the business and the brands could just strive for. Next page, please. So there are several key actions you can see from this slide. There are several key actions business can make to increase trust during and after the pandemic, which is I knew that there is a lot of markets are driving very hard and to work on how can we conquer and how can we face. So first and foremost is to be seen to donate need increment to hospitals and educators and those without assets. Other actions for business to focus on solutions rather than purely selling, cooperating with peers and competitors to fast-track solutions, allocating production capacity to essential items, and including fight against the pandemic as part of the economy's primary goals, which is very echo back, which is the last slide. It has been mentioned that what the respondents expected the businesses should conquer and face. Next slide, please. And during the last 5 months, the notable shift in attitudes towards institutional trust has seen government move from third to the first, with an increase of 11 points. The highlights that the majority of the governments has handled the crisis in controlled and measured manner and acted as trusted leaders providing direction to the other institutions. Next slide, please. However, the most important area we could actually see from the most important role from a company as CEO from our respondents' feedback was not showing too positive performance comparing with the professionals and government leaders, NGOs, and even the media, which is indicated that the trust building for the company during tough time still a wide space to make efforts, and it is a most critical area. Now we look into the food and beverage. So respondents were particularly critical of their own CEOs in dealing with the pandemic, with only 31% of employees believing their CEO performed above expectations. The food and beverage industry CEOs were below this on 29%, posing a questions for CEOs to further consider. Which from the trust report, you can see over half respondents are very concerned about how can we demonstrate as a brand to address the needs at the home first. So as we can see, the CEO's first priority, which is how can we help the consumers to use and also to utilize their home needs. Because during the pandemic, brands have needed to consider the 3 key questions. How long for the virus to be contained? When will the government lift the restrictions? Will consumers still have appetite? Those 3 questions have forced business to rethink their strategy in the short and medium term, and how to fast transform the business model to supply consumers' home needs, for example, service or product strategy. This should be the core to CEOs to consider whilst to combat the pandemic. Next slide, please. So taking China as an example, let's use China. If you could see the pattern from the consumer's behavior change, we have seen a significant rise in the online activity, from the e-commerce to entertainment and fitness and also personal health. People in China have been spending well above average amounts of the time online, many trying to find distractions, whilst the others are using the time productively to learn and improve themselves, which this outbreak has affecting the day-to-day the business and also the consumer's life. Which is next slide, we can show you some examples that China has been done. So we have seen a range of the brands introduced and rethink how they operate and remain in touch with their customer base. So some case studies include, for example, Alibaba, online shopping giant in China. They have registered 1 million new stores and invested live studios to help those stores showcase the products, provide demos, and answer questions directly. In the healthcare space, the largest insurance company, Ping An, has partnered with the central and local government and media to provide online consulting. We have also seen many traditional physical stores, pharmacies, creating eco-platforms to provide online door-to-door service. Finally, of course, sports. A lot of consumers quarantined at home, they were concerned how can I remain my business back as usual. So basically, finally, Nike has finally developed the home exercise and to help after cooperating with the influencers to drive the to drive the business even during the lockdown. This is just the examples brand in China has been doing. So the food and beverage employees, which is that you can see from this slide, the food and beverage employees, why the people actually are very concerned. They have shown from the trust report, you can see how over half respondents are very concerned about their job security during the pandemic. In a crisis, it's very hard to find clarity when the situation and available information are constantly changing, driven by the contingent. Employees will need to adapt the new ways of working, but they won't be able to do so unless they have a clear, consistent information and over direction. So that will build a stronger comfort to employee to deal with the uncertainty. Trust is more important than ever in times of certainty. From our trust report, you could see that from the CEO's action and from the employee's expectation, from consumers' needs, and that is where we are going to strive for. So I'm going to hand over to Rebecca to take you through how can we specifically talking about food and beverage sectors.
Thanks, Melinda. Hopefully you can all hear me well. So what we're now going to pivot to is a study that was a long time coming. We really wanted to set out to define the scope and some of our hypotheses, or test some of our hypotheses around the trust in the food and beverage sector. And when we went into market in March, the world was looking very different from what it is today, but we still have great confidence that these trends that we'll take you through and the thoughts around the food and drink sector still hold true today. I think having a look at the methodology, what we did here was that we did both a quantitative survey, but we also did a whole lot of desktop research as well. We did an online survey with 13 different markets. We had 13,000 respondents, and all field work was conducted between or during the period of March. We also did a review of traditional and social media over the 12 months to help to map some of those trends, and mapped it against 12 subsectors of the industry. And you'll see this report coming, or see this data coming through. If we have a look at what our goal was with regard to the study, our goal was very much to uncover insights to help the food and beverage brands and businesses navigate trust across the industry. And we did that by looking at 4 different questions. The first question was, how is trust faring within the food and beverage industry? How are people engaging? What are the best ways to navigate the key tensions in the food and beverage industry? And we uncovered about 9 different tensions. And what can companies do to build trust? So let's have a look at how is the food and beverage industry faring overall with regard to trust. When we look at trust from an Edelman Trust Management perspective, we look at a number of different metrics. So one is ability, the second is integrity, the third goes to dependability, and the fourth goes to purpose. And what we want to have a look at is how companies are actually performing and how sectors are performing against each of these elements of trust. And we also know that competence and ethics also helps to drive trust. Ethics, as you can see on the slide, is made up of the values against integrity, dependability, and purpose. And competence really goes back to the ability and what or how companies are good at doing particular things. And so we can actually have a look at these and create a recipe which helps you to build up how you are performing or how different sectors are performing vis-a-vis trust. What we also know from the research is that trusters outnumber distrusters 2 to 1. But the industry actually needs to focus more on dependability and integrity. Sorry. You can see on the right-hand side of the slide, 40% of people within the survey thought the food and beverage industry had good ability. So they were good at what they do. But sadly, integrity, or being honest about some of the issues that we face, is not as high as what we'd like it to be. Dependability was also low, and purpose and having a positive impact on society was perceived to be low. We also know that only 1 in 5 people think that food and beverage should stay the course, whereas most people actually want new innovation on how products are made and distributed. What we're seeing is that across Asia Pacific, you've only got 18% of people or 12% of people in China saying that food and beverage should keep doing what it's doing. Some of those numbers are very similar across the other regions. And so I think food and beverage as an industry has a job to do on looking how we can pivot to meet some of the trends that are coming through. Having a look at this slide, I think what the respondents came through and said to us is what was most needed from food and beverage was, number one, to embrace innovation with purpose and passion. Secondarily, to address some of the trust gaps that we've got. And the third was to think and operate and act better. And I really like this quote by Daniel. He said, we need new thinking on global food system issues, but we also need to have a look at new doing. As I said a little bit earlier, we have started to have a look at how we can also create a recipe for trust. And from the thinking that we've pulled together and some of our strategic work that we've done, really, if you start with a strong brand foundation and identity and support that with relevant proof points, and then have a look at how your company or how the sector is actually performing against ability, integrity, dependability, and purpose. If we take consistent action and we're committed and we're also transparent, both across stakeholders and the supply chain, what we see is that trust actually starts to take shape and deepens across both internal and external audiences. And we can then constantly adapt and adjust based on some of those external influences. Now, how are people engaging across the different categories within food and beverage? That was one of the pieces that came out of the research as one of the questions that we were looking to answer. We do know that food and beverage is an incredibly complex and dynamic area to play in. The sheer diversity of it really makes it very exciting to be operating it in. But when it comes to trusting companies to do what's right, people actually have mixed opinions across the industry, with the the highest trust coming at the individual, the farmers and the fishers level, and the lowest trust coming across at fast food restaurants. And you can see that trust builds across some of the different sectors that we've looked at, whether it's cafes, food manufacturers sitting in the middle there, alcoholic and beverage manufacturers are doing well, and then these plant-based meat producers. But interesting, if you have a look at the next slide, there we've also done an overlay of how people perceive these different sectors with regard to competence and also ethics, which are two parts of the trust that I explained earlier. What we find is on the far right-hand side, fast food restaurants are coming across as being low in both competence and ethics. But then across on the far left-hand side, we see that grocery and food retailers are actually high on both competence and ethics, which is an interesting finding. And, you know, we've got some other sectors which are high on competence, but not ethics, which would be the alcohol manufacturing sector. And then plant-based meat products are high on ethics, not competence. I think where that's coming from is there's a lot of concern with regard to how these foods are being made and whether in fact they're going to have the benefits that they're being purported to have. If we have a look at the next slide, and I won't go through this in detail, we've also done a deep dive looking at different audiences and their views around the food and beverage industry. For example, if you look at Gen Xers, they are by far and large the most unengaged in the food and beverage industry, whereas Gen Zers are surprisingly trusting of the food and beverage industry, particularly in emerging spaces. I wanted to call out here specifically on employees, just to pick up on what Melinda was saying. Employees are really wanting much more leadership than what they feel they are getting. And I really do think this is an opportunity for all of us, because our employees are consumers as well, in order to work to see how we can lift their trust within the organisations that they're working for. We have done a little bit in this study on emerging markets, and you can see this data here. We have more deep dive on emerging markets in our bigger trust barometer study, and I'm really happy to share that as another session or share that individually with markets if that would be, individually with either sectors or companies if that would be of use. But what we're saying is that compared to established markets, emerging markets have more trust in big and scale. They want more focus on responsible technology, and not surprisingly, they have many more concerns about access and nutrition. And in fact, we're seeing that heighten, particularly in markets like India, due to COVID-19, where we are having real challenges with our supply chain and the continuity and the access to food, and also the loss of jobs and loss of income. So we've also got a couple of examples here of what this means in terms of engaging and some people that are doing it well. What we're seeing is that Danone, as a global food and beverage company, has really built trust holistically, not narrowly. They've been committed to a journey of transformation. Their CEO has been very outspoken about his vision for the food industry, and they're on a quest to become a B Corp, and that is actually trickling down throughout the whole organisation and driving significant change. I think Frito-Lay has also picked up on focusing on individuals, not mass markets. And what we've seen from Frito-Lay is that during the time of COVID and just before, they had put up a website, snacks.com, to enable access to their foods directly through an e-commerce platform. And then this third area of imperfect foods, where they're enlightening people around the role that food and fruits and vegetables don't have to be perfect, and they're allowing those foods to flow through and actually help to solve for some of the food waste and also food security issues. If we have a look at the third section that we looked at, and again, we're giving a bit of a whistle-stop tour through this, we had a look at what are the best ways to navigate some of the key tensions in the food and beverage industry. And there's a number of different tensions and different debates that we're seeing in the industry. And so we had a deep dive into those. If we have a look at those debates, and I'm only going to really share 2 of them with you today, there's another 4 that we don't have time to cover. There's 6 tensions we're seeing: accessibility versus sustainability. We're seeing food as food versus food as politics as a second tension. Plant-based, commitment versus choice. The 4th is passion versus reality. The 5th looks at small and local versus big and global. And the 6th one looks at digital versus bricks and mortar. So the 2 that I've picked today, one's the accessibility versus sustainability, and the second one is the bricks and mortar. I mean, obviously this is very timely, particularly as we move into the later stages of the debate. And this was really having a look at looking beyond hunger and making sure that we've got, making sure that we're empowering people to feed themselves and their families, and making sure that children everywhere have access to healthy diets that they need to reach full potential. And we explored 4 different areas in this: purpose versus operations, premium versus equity, perception across the industry, and then what this means for brands and businesses. The big finding, and it's not surprising for a lot of us that have been in the sector for a long time, but doing good for society is becoming an expectation for food and beverage companies, particularly as we look at the big issues. We know that consumers are relying upon brands to help society weather this coronavirus pandemic, with 62% of people believing that countries won't make it through the crisis without brands playing a critical role to address some of these challenges. And also this view that consumers agree that companies and brands are responding more quickly and effectively than governments right at that grassroots. And first and foremost, I think food companies and beverage companies should be looking at how we can partner to help solve some of this access to food and access to nutrition. Where food and beverage has historically underperformed is this particular area, with only 1 in 5 people agreeing that food and beverage companies place people over profits. And I think this is quite a sad statistic, given that I have been, within the food and beverage industry. 9 in 10 people are not confident that we have a plan to produce enough food to keep up with the growing population. And I think that's something that we all need to have a look at as we move through and drive the businesses forward. If we have a look, there's not a lofty goal here. This is it's a call to action for the here and now. There's 3 very strong issues that were coming out of this study for a focus for food and beverage companies. The first being limiting food waste, the second being providing food access to all, and the third being prioritising public health and nutrition. And one of the trends that we're seeing is that people are starting to put those big long-term issues like environmental sustainability on the back burner a little bit, as nutrition and access to food is coming to the forefront as a result of COVID-19. But we do see that producing food and beverages sustainably is still 4th in terms of ranking, but what we need to make sure is that we're also addressing this access to nutrition. And this is a change that can be led across all categories. Obviously grocery can satisfy access most, and they really can play a role in convenience, but there may still need to be more done in this space. Food manufacturers are still lagging on affordability and healthy options. And I know from my work in the emerging markets that this continues to be a challenge. And not surprisingly, fast food lags on health and nutrition, and they're really quite a strong dominant player within convenience, but also in terms of affordability. So what we think is that there's an opportunity for brands to find a way to enable equitable access, but also premiumization. And we should try to find and continue to strive for that balance between having high quality products being sold at a premium price, but also having it made equally available to all people at low cost. And you see that 46% of people are pushing down in that equitable side of this tension. We've seen a number of different companies that are doing this well. So the Smart Cook has been, essentially it's a new initiative that helps to provide a series of articles that enable affordable cooking from every angle, and it's just teaching people how to cook. The second example that I have here is from Hellmann's. Hellmann's has really been committed to rescuing good food that may have been sitting in the fridge, and trying to rescue that food, repurpose that food, and then use Hellmann's as a flavouring in order to make it more palatable. And finally, this example here around Dorsey's. I think what we're seeing with Dorsey's is that they are wanting to invite their customers to be part of solution. And we know that brands that do that and do that well often get better impact as the result of those programs. So then if we have a look at bricks and mortar, which we all know is increasing significantly during the time of COVID, as we see more and more people going to online. I think grocery and healthcare, with this quote from Chris Walton, has been the last bastions of strength against the rise of e-commerce. And I know, again, a lot of grocery and healthcare people have found it very difficult to make this work. There was 3 areas that we've explored here: novice versus guru, strengths versus opportunities, and then what this means for brands and businesses. At the end of the day, we know that, the study found that even in a stay-at-home world, most choose in-person groceries over online. And in the last 3 months, there's been a 7-point increase in trust in groceries and supermarkets. Interestingly, we only saw 48% of people that would never see themselves buying exclusively online. And in the US now, there's 72% of people that do all of their grocery shopping in store. So there's a migration there of 28 people that are starting to do all of their grocery shopping online. What we're also seeing is that only a third of people have integrated tech fully into their lives. We've got three parts to this. We've got tech avoiders, we've got tech considerers, and we've also got tech enthusiasts. The tech enthusiasts are more likely to be male and higher income and urban. They enjoy browsing for options and they're highly informed, whereas the tech avoiders are more likely to be female, suburban, rural, and lower income, and more functional and reluctant relationship with food. With digital shopping, we believe that this may be able to close the gap by filling in where the grocery lacks. We have found that there are a number of strengths of grocery and threats to digital. And people are grown to grocery because of the familiarity and the access to new and exciting food options. But digital really does have an opportunity to increase how it plays in this space, to lead with more values, but also to make it more of an engaging experience for people. When we have a look at some of the people that are doing it well, Instacart is an example that comes through in terms of proudly borrowing equity and also trust. What we see with Instacart is that they are building established brand equity by borrowing it from some of the physical retailers. And it's very much like a Taobao where they've got stores within stores, and that has actually helped to drive support and also drive confidence in that platform. There's another one here with Alibaba taking smaller steps towards digital integration, where they've been successfully leading in fresh and quality food, and having everyday fresh package labels actually showing the different days that the food is available and the freshness of the food. So that's a couple of examples in that section that we thought helped to illustrate how digital is becoming more the norm. So what can companies do from here to build trust? For us, we see that there are 5 things that food and beverage companies can do to help to build trust. People really now expect food and beverage companies to step up and make a difference in the here and now, with food waste and access being the #1 priority. We've seen gaps in trust across the industry stemming primarily from low levels of perceived integrity and dependability, but we've also seen a focus on solutions and transparency. Food and beverage is a very complex sector with varying degrees of trust, and really we need to try to work in partnership, not ownership, in order to have an impact. Audiences also, as you know from your own research, have different relationships with what they eat and drink, and we really need to have effective strategies that are looking at individuals over the masses. And at the end of the day, trust comes from the sum of many parts, and it's not a one-off tactic. We need to create a roadmap that helps to connect the brand and the company foundation to some consistent trust driving actions. So a very quick whistle stop tour through some of the research that we've got. And we're really, as I said before, really happy if you want to have a more deep dive into either a sector. So let's say, for example, agribusiness or food manufacturing or alcohol, that we can take you through the deep dive that we've done in those sectors using our trust barometer that was our January data. Or we can take you through some of the other tensions that we've got within this report, for example, plant-based, and do a bit of a deeper dive into some of those tensions. But given that trust in itself is something that is and will continue to be a key priority for all of us moving forward, we've seen fluctuations in trust in food and beverage, with food and beverage now being at the highest trust level we've ever seen. But what we also do see over the 20 years that we've been doing this, we quite often see when you've got a peak in trust that it falls off again. And quite often businesses and categories struggle to maintain that high trust. So we encourage a regular drumbeat of activities in order to continue to build that trust. And we're more than happy to help partner with you to see how we could unlock that for you, because we do know that by building trust, it does impact on it does impact positively on share price and does actually impact positively on growth. So with that, I'll turn across to Stephen, who I think is going to moderate some Q&A. And I just wanted to introduce Amanda Go, who is our sectors lead. She works across all of the different sectors at Edelman. She's also on the call and she'll be able to answer some questions as well for us. Thanks, Stephen.